Ahead of the summit, I spoke to Republican Congressman Michael McCaul and Mike Turner. Mr. McCaul serves as the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Mr. Turner serves as chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Chairman McCaul, I'll start with you. This NATO summit, Ukraine is going to be a central topic. And just today, we saw a Russian strike hit a children's hospital in Kiev, killing dozens of people. More than 3 years now, or 3 years into this war, Vladimir Putin appears undeterred not only by Ukraine's resistance, but also by Western support. So what needs to be achieved at the summit?
Well, I think, first of all, I would take the restrictions off the use of ATACMS that I personally put in the supplemental. That's a longer range artillery. These rocket fires are coming right across the border from Russia, primarily Kharkiv. Yet Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, will not allow Ukraine to use everything it has to win this fight. Right now, they have one hand tied behind their backs, and I've asked them repeatedly to lift that restriction. I met with President Zelensky in Paris and in Singapore, and he made this cry for help, if you will, to change the rules here. They changed the policy, allowing them to fire across the border, but then they limit the weapons they can use that can't effectively achieve that goal.
Do you think this needs to be an important point of discussion with NATO allies this week?
Well, I had this conversation with Secretary General Stoltenberg at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly meeting, and just a month and a half ago, and he expressed full support for Ukraine getting the ability to use any weapons that they receive from any NATO allies to be able to defend themselves and to be able to hit, as Chairman McCaul was saying, valid military targets in Russia. They have to be able to take the fight to Russia as Russia is attacking them from Russia. And I think this would be an important step. And certainly the Secretary General supports it.
But are you confident that that would be the step it would take to actually allow Ukraine to win this war?
Well, they're fighting with restrictions. So if you remove the restrictions, you will increase their ability to be successful. And I think that's incredibly important.
So Chairman McCaul, this comes at the same time as we've seen one NATO ally, Viktor Orban of Hungary, travel to Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin, then travel to China to meet with Xi Jinping there. First of all, what do you think of a NATO ally traveling to these countries and having these meetings?
Yeah, I think it's a bit disturbing. I'm all for heads of state having meetings, but these are our top two adversaries. Chairman Xi, Putin met at the Beijing Olympics, formed this unholy alliance that then led to the invasion of Ukraine. And of course, the Ayatollah is in with this whole alliance, as well as Kim Jong-un. So I'm not sure what they talked about or whether it was productive or not, but I think just the appearance from a NATO ally is not comforting.
Do you think it undermines a pro-Ukraine coalition in NATO?
I do think that, as Chairman McCaul was saying, that leaders of their country have to make their best decisions for them as to who they meet with and who they have discussions with. But at the same time, there has been this slow response from Hungary, both in the expansion of NATO and by the way, this is a successful meeting of NATO just by the fact that Sweden and Finland are going to be fully seated at this. What an outcome that really thwarts Putin's efforts to try to contain NATO, that NATO now has a very, very long border with Russia as a result of his own work. But I do think that the alliance is working, NATO is working, and that's what's important.
I can say that one outcome of this meeting in China certainly is that China is calling on world powers, including NATO allies meeting here in Washington, to help Russia and Ukraine sit down at the table and negotiate. And Viktor Orban's supporters in Europe say, look, he's the only world leader doing precisely that, trying to bring these players around the table. What's your response to that?
It may very well end up in a ceasefire and negotiated settlement, but now is not the time.
Why is that?
Because right now Ukraine doesn't have leverage at the negotiating table because of these restrictions I've been talking about. If they would permit the use of ATACMS, the full use, then the goal would be to push the Russians as far out as possible, then call for a ceasefire and have a negotiation. Now, former President Trump has talked about how he would negotiate this, but I think Ukraine has to have that leverage, and they need some victories, quite frankly, if they want support from the American people.
What plan do you think NATO allies need to have to ensure that there is a path towards a resolution to this conflict?
Well, certainly the alliance has been unified, both in its support and its condemnation of Russia. And certainly in the provisions of weapons, the United States having then recently approved the new supplement that provides U.S. support for Ukraine. I think at this point it really is, as Chairman McCaul was saying, the issue of how are these weapons going to be used? How can Ukraine defend itself? What intelligence do they need so that they can be more successful? They certainly have the will to fight. They're doing an incredible job in defending their country under amazing odds and amazing difficulty. They shouldn't be doing it under amazing and difficult restrictions.
Okay, Chairman McCaul, you mentioned the former President Donald Trump. So I have to ask, we saw reporting in Politico and Die Welt in Germany this week that NATO allies around the world are preparing for a possible change in the White House. Of course, there's an election in November. And former President Trump has called into question U.S. support for Ukraine, saying it never ends. What do you think support for Ukraine would look like if he were to win in November?
Well, remember, President Trump was the first president to submit to the Congress a request for lethal aid to Ukraine, $300 million that I signed off on. I think he doesn't want to lose this fight. That would certainly not be in our best interest or NATO's.
Are you sure?
And we can't abandon our NATO allies at this critical time. And we need to send a strong message to China. They can't do the same thing to Taiwan. So I think his plan, and we've had back channels that he wants to give them the aid to help them push the Russians out as far as possible, and then at that time negotiate a treaty, a peace deal, a security agreement as well between the United States, NATO, and Ukraine.
So, Chairman Turner, the reason I ask if that plan is certain is because allies were shaken by the words that the former president expressed at a rally earlier this year when he said Russia could do whatever the hell they want with NATO allies that don't meet defense spending targets. Are you worried about the message that might send to Russia, even thinking about a possible negotiation down the road?
At his heart, Donald Trump is a negotiator, and all of his statements and words really help formulate policies that are actually quite linear. I mean, he's been very supportive of NATO, but he's supportive of NATO reaching their commitments. I think it's a small ask to make, and I think it's something certainly you're seeing more and more countries be motivated for, and I think certainly Donald Trump's words will motivate a little more also to do what is required. The other aspect is with respect to Ukraine, being a negotiator is hard. Donald Trump knows to negotiate from a place of strength, and that means give Ukraine what they need to be able to get the best possible situation before you have negotiations.
I think the 2% of GDP that President Trump was able to get the majority of NATO countries to achieve has made them stronger. And they've never been more strong than they are today, particularly with Finland and Sweden. I think only 8 countries have not met the 2% of GDP right now, and they're approaching it very quickly. So I think, he wants a strong NATO that can take care of its own backyard and not just be relying on the United States of America.
Quick last question to you both, and I'll start with you, Chairman Turner. Just quickly, your expectations for this NATO summit.
Well, this summit is going to show that the allies are strong and supportive of one another, supportive of Ukraine. There's going to be a unified voice that comes out of this, and there's going to be great celebration that Sweden and Finland have joined the alliance as a great symbolism of really Vladimir Putin losing in what his goals and objectives were to divide the alliance.
Yeah, the same. I think that Putin's goal was to divide and conquer NATO. He's unified it and made it stronger than ever. And I think that is going to be the message of this summit. And I think the American people will like that. I mean, the American people at the end of the day like a winner. And NATO is winning. I think Ukraine can win this fight if we allow them to do so.